Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into the absolute most critical geopolitical, domestic, and scientific events of July 22nd, 2026. The world is moving at a blistering pace today, with major developments breaking across multiple continents. As always, my goal is to cut through the noise and give you the clear, structured info you need to understand exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what you should take away from it all. So let's get right to it.
Here is what we've got on the docket today. First, Middle East escalations. Second, shifts in the Ukraine war. Third, U.S. politics and diplomacy. And fourth, tech, law, and nature.
Starting off with Section 1, Middle East escalations, focusing on recent conflicts and a massive nuclear deal.
To really grasp the stakes right now, we have to look at President Trump's incredibly stark warning regarding the vital Strait of Hormuz. The president has stated the U.S. will, quote, bomb and destroy an Iranian bridge or power plant for every unprovoked ship attack in the strait. This is a massive, highly specific line drawn in the sand. Remember, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's absolute most critical maritime choke points for global energy supplies, and this policy ties immediate, heavy infrastructure retaliation to any disruption of that specific shipping lane.
And we're seeing a literal tit-for-tat escalation currently unfolding. On one side, U.S. Central Command has executed its 12th consecutive night of airstrikes aimed squarely at Iranian military assets. But, the response has been incredibly swift. Iranian forces have launched retaliatory drone swarms right back at U.S. regional infrastructure, specifically hitting bases in Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain. We are looking at a sustained, high-tempo exchange of fire that is spanning multiple international borders.
So where does diplomacy fit into this? Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is currently trying to balance diplomatic openness with a strict red line on maritime navigation. While attending a summit with Southeast Asian foreign ministers today, he emphasized that while the diplomatic door does remain open for negotiations, the U.S. absolutely will not permit Tehran to dictate who can and cannot navigate the Strait of Hormuz. It's a dual approach, right? Maintaining a heavy military posture while leaving a very specific off-ramp available.
Moving further down to the Red Sea, Houthi rebels are actively enforcing a blockade that is literally forcing massive commercial ships to physically turn around in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. The Houthis have claimed attacks on 2 commercial oil tankers, and they are deliberately targeting vessels bound for Saudi Arabia. The threat level here is so severe that global shipping companies are looking at the risk and deciding to execute emergency U-turns rather than risk the passage. The economic implications for our global supply chains here are just immense.
Amidst all this kinetic conflict, the White House just formally approved a landmark 30-year civilian nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia. This is a foundational geopolitical shift. While military assets are engaged elsewhere in the region, this specific deal paves the way for joint U.S.-Saudi uranium enrichment initiatives, and it supports a massive expansion of civilian reactors inside the kingdom. It's a multi-decade commitment that fundamentally binds U.S. and Saudi energy and tech interests for the next generation.
To close out the Middle East theater for today, tensions really spiked in southern Lebanon as Israeli forces fired warning shots at deploying Lebanese army units. This happened when Lebanese soldiers crossed into an area outside a mutually designated pilot security zone. It perfectly captures how incredibly volatile these borders are right now. Even minor navigational errors or standard deployments are immediately met with live fire warnings to prevent a broader escalation.
Meanwhile, how is leadership shifting on the Eastern European front? Let's move to our next section and see how tactics are actively shifting in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
Section 2. Shifts in the Ukraine war, looking at new leadership and evolving tactics.
This crucial data point from the UN Human Rights Office really gives you pause. It highlights a devastating 33% surge in Ukrainian civilian casualties, which is largely being driven by expanding drone and missile raids. I really want you to let that number sink in. During just the first half of 2026, the human cost skyrocketed by a third. This indicates that the nature of these bombardments is either becoming more indiscriminate or they're targeting heavily populated infrastructure, tragically catching way more civilians in the crossfire.
Back in Kiev, President Zelensky has officially reshuffled his military command, replacing General Syrsky with Major General Drapatsy. General Syrsky's departure follows highly publicized public protests and some pretty significant political friction over the nation's broader defense strategy. Stepping into this absolutely monumental role is Major General Drapatsy. Anytime you see a change in top brass of this magnitude, it almost always signals a coming pivot in a military's operational playbook.
Tactically, we are seeing Ukraine push much deeper into Russian territory, hitting military logistics hubs and, interestingly, major commercial e-commerce facilities in Krasnodar and Stavropol.
This is a fascinating evolution in their strategy. They aren't just targeting the hubs supplying Russian military drone components anymore. They actually struck facilities run by Wildberries, which is Russia's largest e-commerce retailer. It demonstrates a very concerted effort to not only choke off military supply lines, but to bring the disruption directly into the Russian domestic commercial sphere.
All right, moving into Section 3, U.S. politics and diplomacy, where we're tracking domestic funds and global ties.
First up, a very significant, practical, diplomatic maneuver. President Trump met with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun and subsequently lifted the long-standing ban on direct flights between the two nations. Re-establishing direct commercial flights dramatically improves logistics, trade, and interpersonal travel between the U.S. and Lebanon. It signals a thawing of specific travel restrictions and a serious effort to normalize bilateral transit.
Back at home, the White House just announced it is withholding over $1 billion in Medicaid funds from California and Minnesota over alleged accounting irregularities. $1 billion, with a B, is a massive hit to state healthcare budgets. The administration is citing strict compliance issues to justify freezing these funds. This move is a stark example of federal oversight being used as a hard lever against state governments, and it's virtually guaranteed to set off some intense legal and political battles between these states and Washington.
Briefly pivoting to global security for a second, a massive search operation is currently underway in Kashmir following the fatal militant shooting of a police officer in Anantnag. It's really vital to remember that while massive global conflicts tend to dominate the headlines, highly volatile localized security crises continue to simmer worldwide. The tragic death of this 35-year-old head constable has immediately locked down the region as security forces sweep for the militants responsible.
And finally, Section 4, Tech, Law, and Nature, the Future Frontiers.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright just announced massive federal funding directed at universities and national labs to push the absolute boundaries of AI research. 278 separate scientific research projects were just greenlit under what they're calling the AI Genesis mission. Basically, the Department of Energy is planting hundreds of seeds across the country's brightest institutions, ensuring the U.S. aggressively maintains a competitive edge in translating artificial intelligence into tangible, real-world scientific breakthroughs.
Let's translate some legalese real quick to break down a major legal shift today regarding the National Labor Relations Board's successor bar rule. First, we have to define what this actually is. The successor bar rule was a mandate that prohibited a new employer, say a company that just bought out another company, from immediately withdrawing recognition from the established labor unions representing the workers. It was originally designed to protect union status during messy corporate transitions.
Well, applying the recent Loper-Bright framework, the D.C. Circuit Court just struck this rule down entirely, declaring the agency exceeded its legal authority. This is a massive legal earthquake for labor relations. The court used the Supreme Court's new precedent to literally pull back the regulatory power of the NLRB. So moving forward, companies that acquire unionized businesses are going to have much more leeway to challenge or withdraw union recognition. It fundamentally alters the leverage dynamics between corporate acquisitions and organized labor.
To cap things off today, Mother Nature is entering the chat. Meteorological services are issuing advisories as Tropical Storm Bertha bears down on vital southern maritime shipping routes. We've talked a lot about man-made disruptions to supply chains today, but nature is also playing a huge role. Bertha is currently intensifying in the Central Atlantic corridor, kicking up heavy seas and gusty winds that are literally forcing commercial coastal traffic to reroute or completely delay their transit.
Which leaves us with a really massive question to chew on regarding the fragility and the future of our global supply chains in the face of these compounding challenges. Look at everything we've unpacked in this explainer. Tankers executing U-turns in the Red Sea to avoid missiles, drones hitting commercial e-commerce hubs in Russia, and now heavy storms disrupting Atlantic shipping routes. How resilient is our global trade network when it's pressured by kinetic war, legal upheaval, and extreme weather all at the exact same time? I really want you to keep that question in mind as these stories continue to develop. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped clarify a very complex day of news, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to break it all down.